She never expected her blind date to start with two children. Not a man with flowers, but two little girls with matching eyes and a message that would change everything. Kayla Emerson sat alone at the corner table of Maple Avenue Coffee, watching the clock tick away her hope. 6:47 p.m., 17 minutes late. Her chamomile tea had gone cold, its steam long gone, like every ounce of excitement she'd brought with her. Around her, couples leaned close, laughter floating through the air like warm candlelight. But in Kayla's corner, there was only silence and a half-empty cup of disappointment. She told herself she'd wait 5 more minutes. 5 minutes, and then she'd text Diane, her co-worker who'd set up the date, and admit that she was done trying. That maybe, after 2 years of living behind the safety of her veterinary clinic, she wasn't meant for this anymore. Diane had sworn he was different. His name's Matthew Caldwell, she'd said. Architectural engineer, 34, steady, honest, the kind of man who still opens doors. But sitting there, alone under the soft jazz and amber lights, Kayla felt that old ache of doubt crawl back in. Maybe love just wasn't for people like her. Too guarded, too careful, too afraid of the past. The bell over the coffee shop door chimed. Her heart lifted before she could stop it. But it wasn't him. It wasn't a man at all. 2 little girls stood in the doorway, identical twins, with curly brown hair and bright green eyes that carried far too much purpose for their age. They wore matching red jackets and school shoes that tapped softly against the tile as they looked around the shop with laser focus. And then, both pairs of eyes landed on Kayla, before she could even breathe. They walked straight toward her. No hesitation, no shyness. The taller one stopped in front of her, squared her shoulders, and spoke with perfect seriousness. "Are you Miss Kayla?" Kayla blinked. "Yes, I am." The girl nodded, then pointed to her twin. "I'm Daisy. This is Hazel. Our daddy's sorry he's late." For a moment, Kayla just stared. Words caught in her throat. Daddy? The world tilted slightly. These were Matthew's daughters. They had to be. But Diane hadn't said a word about kids. Not one before she could respond. Daisy sighed a heavy, grown-up kind of sigh, and pulled out the chair across from Kayla. "We should tell the truth," she said firmly. And in that instant, Kayla realized her night wasn't ending in heartbreak after all. It was just beginning, and this beginning was unlike anything she could have imagined. Kayla's heart stumbled over itself. "The truth," she repeated softly, unsure whether to laugh or panic. The little girl nodded with a seriousness far too old for a freckled face. Hazel, the quieter twin, leaned forward and whispered, "Daddy doesn't know we're here." The words hit Kayla like a splash of cold water. She blinked, glancing toward the door, half expecting their father to appear at any second, but no one came. Daisy clasped her hands like she was chairing a meeting. "He's sorry he's late," she said matter-of-factly. "We know because we heard him on the phone last night. There was a problem at his job, something about a building and the foundation." Hazel nodded solemnly beside her. "He said he couldn't believe it was happening tonight. He had something really important at 6:30 at the Maple Avenue coffee shop." Kayla leaned back in her chair, part of her wanting to laugh at the absurdity, the other part wondering what, exactly, she had walked into. "So you two figured out this was the place?" she asked gently. Daisy straightened proudly. "We're very smart." He wrote it on the calendar and even drew a smiley face next to it. A tiny smile tugged at Kayla's lips. A smiley face. He had been excited. Somewhere deep down, that flicker of warmth began to spread again, cautious, but real. "When we heard him say he might be late," Hazel continued, "we made a plan. We asked Mrs. Ferguson, she's our babysitter, to bring us here. We told her it was really, really important." Kayla followed their gaze out the window and spotted a silver sedan parked at the curb. An older woman sat in the driver's seat, watching them with a patient, bewildered smile. When she noticed Kayla looking, she waved weakly. Daisy leaned closer, her tone conspiratorial. "We begged her," she confessed. There might have been tears. Hazel giggled. "Strategic crying," Daisy corrected firmly. Kayla pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. These girls were something else. "So," Kayla said, folding her arms, You're telling me your dad doesn't know you're here, but you came to meet his date anyway? Both girls nodded, as if this were the most reasonable plan in the world. Because, Daisy said softly, he really liked you already. Kayla's brow furrowed. He did. Hazel's voice dropped to a whisper. He practiced what to say in the mirror last night. Daisy grinned. He tried 4 shirts and said bad words when he couldn't pick one. That did it, Kayla laughed, full and honest, and for the first time that evening, the loneliness inside her chest began to lift. But the laughter faded when she noticed something else in the girl's eyes. Beneath their excitement, there was a shadow, a quiet kind of sadness that no child their age should carry. Tell me about your dad, Kayla said softly. Does he go on many dates? The twins exchanged a look, the air between them heavy. Daisy shook her head. Never. You're the first one since Mommy went to heaven. The noise of the cafe faded into nothing. Kayla's chest tightened as Hazel continued, her voice trembling. It was 2 years ago. She got really sick. Daddy said it was her brain. Daisy added quickly, as if to protect her sister. He took care of us all by himself. He learned to braid hair from YouTube. Kayla's throat burned with emotion. She imagined a man staying up late at night, watching tutorials, just to make his daughter smile. He's the best daddy, Hazel whispered. He sings Mommy's songs every night. Daisy nodded, proud and fierce. He makes grilled cheese, with 3 cheeses. Kayla laughed softly, wiping at the corner of her eye before it could betray her. These 2 girls, their love for their father, it was fierce, pure, and unfiltered. And somewhere between their words, Kayla felt something stirred deep inside her, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. The barista arrived with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate piled high, with whipped cream. The twins gasped in delight, their earlier sadness momentarily forgotten. Kayla watched them sip carefully, ending up with white mustaches of cream that made them giggle uncontrollably. And in that laughter, something shifted. This wasn't the night she'd expected. It wasn't a date. It was a beginning she hadn't seen coming, and a reminder that sometimes, love doesn't walk in wearing a pressed shirt and carrying flowers. Sometimes, it shows up in the form of 2 determined little girls with sticky hands, messy curls, and hearts full of hope. As Kayla smiled across the table, Daisy leaned forward, her eyes bright. Miss Kayla, she said in a whisper that sounded like fate, do you believe in second chances? Kayla's breath caught. I didn't, she said softly. Not until tonight. Kayla didn't know how long she'd been sitting there, watching Daisy and Hazel drink their hot chocolate like it was liquid gold. Something about them, their bright curiosity, their brave little hearts, had melted something in her she didn't even realize was frozen. She had walked into this coffee shop expecting disappointment, but instead, she had stumbled into the kind of story no one would believe. Outside, the sky had slipped into that quiet, indigo hour where day reluctantly gives into night. Through the window, the street lamps flickered on one by one, painting the sidewalks in soft halos of light. The reflection of the twins shimmered in the glass, 2 tiny faces glowing with hope. And just then, Kayla felt a pull inside her chest, like her heart was trying to remind her of something she'd long forgotten, how it felt to care. Do you miss her? Kayla asked gently. The question slipped out before she could stop it. The girls exchanged a small, secret look, the kind that said they'd talked about this many times before. Hazel nodded first, her curls brushing her cheeks. Every day. But Daddy says she's in the music now. The music, Kayla repeated softly. Daisy's voice grew almost reverent. Mommy was a music teacher. When she got sick, she couldn't sing anymore. So Daddy told us that when we hear songs that make our hearts feel warm, that's Mommy saying hello. Kayla swallowed the lump rising in her throat. She wanted to tell them how beautiful that was, how deeply human, but her voice caught before she could. Hazel took a sip of her cocoa and added quietly, Sometimes, when Daddy sings to us at night, I can almost hear her in his voice. For a few moments, they just sat there, the 3 of them, surrounded by the soft hum of espresso machines, the distant laughter of strangers, and the small miracle of connection born out of loss. Then Kayla's phone buzzed again. A text from Diane. Any word from him? He said there's an emergency at the site. Please don't leave yet. He'll make it if he can. Kayla stared at the screen, the words sinking in. So, it was true. He hadn't stood her up. He'd tried. She looked back at Daisy and Hazel. Your dad, she said gently. He must be working very hard right now. Both girls nodded in perfect unison. He's fixing a library, Daisy said proudly. For kids. He says stories deserve safe places to live. Kayla smiled faintly. Sounds like he's a good man. The best, Hazel whispered, eyes shining. For a long while, they just talked. About pancakes shaped like butterflies. About treehouses and bedtime songs. About a father who never stopped showing up, even when life had taken everything from him. And with each story, Kayla's curiosity grew into something else entirely. Admiration, maybe even awe. By the time the clock read 7:20, the coffee shop was beginning to empty out. The barista was stacking chairs, and the autumn wind outside rattled the windows. Kayla gathered her courage, leaned forward, and said the words that changed the night forever. How about we bring your daddy some dinner? Hazel's eyes went wide. Really, Kayla said, smiling. You said he's working hard, right? Let's surprise him. The transformation was instant. The twins gasped and looked at each other like she'd just offered them a trip to Disneyland. Chinese food. Daisy squealed. From the Golden Palace. He loves orange chicken and sweet and sour pork. Extra spring rolls, Hazel added seriously. He always says you can never have too many. And just like that, the plan was set. Within minutes, Kayla had placed the order, paid for it, and helped the girls collect their coats. Out by the curb, Mrs. Ferguson rolled down her window, utterly bewildered when she heard what was happening. You're taking dinner to a construction site? She asked, half laughing, half worried. Yes, ma'am, Kayla said kindly. Apparently, it's an emergency mission. The old woman studied her for a moment, this young stranger who had somehow fallen into her evening, and then nodded. Well, she said, he's a good man. He deserves something good tonight. The drive took 10 minutes, maybe 15. The city's lights passed in blurs of gold and blue as the girls chattered in the back seat, their excitement filling the car like music. Kayla listened, smiling softly as Hazel described her dad's engineer face, the one he made when he was thinking too hard, and Daisy recounted how he'd once burned dinner trying to fix a leaky faucet. It was chaotic and precious and deeply human. When they finally pulled up to the construction site, it looked like something out of a movie. A skeletal building rising against the night sky, floodlights casting long, dramatic shadows across the concrete. The sign on the chain-link fence read Future Home of the Maple Avenue Public Library. Kayla felt her chest tighten again. Of course, he was building a library. A man who built safe places for stories, and for people. They spotted him inside a temporary trailer, rolling up blueprints while two men stood nearby in hard hats. Even from a distance, Kayla could see the exhaustion in his posture, the kind of weariness that comes from carrying too much for too long. His sleeves were rolled up, his shirt rumpled, his hair slightly disheveled. Daisy was the first to move. She jumped out of the car, clutching a paper bag of takeout like it was treasure, and marched straight toward the trailer. Hazel trailed behind her, hesitant but smiling. Kayla followed, her heart pounding in rhythm with the gravel crunch beneath her shoes. Daisy knocked, 3 sharp, confident raps. Inside, Matthew looked up, his eyes widening. The pen slipped from his fingers as he recognized the two faces peering through the glass. He said something to his co-workers, who grinned knowingly, and stepped outside. Daisy? Hazel. His voice was a mix of shock and disbelief. What on earth? Then his gaze shifted past them, and time seemed to stop. Kayla froze in the doorway, clutching her coat. Their eyes met, and everything in him changed. The exhaustion, the tension, the professional distance, it all fell away in a heartbeat, replaced by something softer, almost stunned. You're Kayla, he said quietly, as if the name itself carried weight. She nodded, smiling awkwardly. Guilty. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the floodlights and the faint rustle of paper inside the trailer. Then Daisy's voice broke through the silence. Surprise. We brought dinner. Matthew blinked, utterly bewildered. You what? Hazel stepped forward, holding up the takeout bag, like a peace offering. "You were late, so we came to find you." Miss Kayla helped. Behind him, one of the workers chuckled and grabbed a container from the bag. "We'll eat outside," he said, winking at Matthew before disappearing into the night. Now it was just the four of them, a man, a woman, and two little girls, with too much heart for their own good. Matthew ran a hand through his hair, laughing under his breath in disbelief. "I'm so sorry," he said finally, turning to Kayla. "This isn't exactly how I imagined tonight." Kayla smiled gently. "No, I don't think it's how anyone imagined it." The twins stood proudly between them, grinning from ear to ear, completely unaware of the strange magic they'd just created. Daisy tilted her head. "So are we eating or what?" And that broke the last bit of awkwardness. Matthew laughed, a full, genuine, unguarded laugh that filled the space around them like light. Kayla had never heard anything so alive. They ate right there, in the middle of that half-finished library, sitting on overturned buckets and blueprint stacks. The food was warm, the laughter warmer. Kayla learned how Matthew had built a treehouse with his daughters, how he still sang lullabies his wife used to sing, and how he circled this date on his calendar 3 times because he wanted to believe love wasn't done with him yet. And somewhere between spring rolls and stories, Kayla realized she was looking at something rare. A man who'd broken, but hadn't stayed broken. A father who'd learned to rebuild, brick by brick, not just buildings but a family. As the night wore on, Daisy yawned and leaned against Hazel, eyelids heavy. Kayla smiled as Matthew draped his jacket over them. Their laughter had quieted into the kind of peace that only comes when hearts feel safe. When she finally stood to leave, Matthew followed her to the edge of the trailer. "Thank you," he said softly, "for this, for them, for showing up." Kayla looked back at him, her breath catching. "You have no idea," she said quietly, "how much I needed to." Their eyes met, steady, unguarded, full of something new and terrifyingly real. And in that quiet moment under the floodlights, surrounded by dust and unfinished walls, a spark caught flame, one that neither of them had been looking for, but both had been waiting for all along. The next morning, sunlight poured through Kayla's clinic windows, landing across the polished tile floors and the framed photos of rescued animals that lined the walls. It should have felt like any other workday, but it didn't. Something inside her had changed. She moved through the morning routine, feeding, checking charts, greeting her assistant, but her mind wasn't in the room. It was still at that construction site, sitting on a pile of blueprints, laughing with two little girls who believed in love more fiercely than most adults ever could. Every time she thought about them, Daisy's confidence, Hazel's quiet sweetness, a smile crept to her lips. And when she thought of their father, of the way he'd looked at her under that flickering work light, part of her heart fluttered in a way that felt both thrilling and dangerous. By noon, she found herself standing at the clinic's front desk, her phone in hand. No new messages. She hated that she was checking. She hated that she cared. But beneath the frustration was something tender, the wish that maybe, just maybe, he was thinking of her too. And then, just as she was locking up for lunch, her phone buzzed. One new message. "Matthew Caldwell. I wanted to thank you again for last night. Daisy and Hazel can't stop talking about you. I think I owe you dinner, this time without hard hats." Kayla stared at the text for a long moment, the corners of her mouth lifting despite herself. She typed, erased, retyped, until she finally sent. "Kayla, only if there's orange chicken involved." The reply came almost instantly. "Matthew, deal. Saturday pancakes first." Her heart skipped. Saturday pancakes. The words that had become a small family tradition for two little girls who'd accidentally brought two hearts together. She didn't even hesitate. "Kayla, 8 a.m. sharp." Saturday arrived wrapped in golden autumn light. The air carried the faint smell of maple and leaves, and Kayla found herself standing on the front porch of Matthew Caldwell's house at exactly 7:58 a.m. She hesitated for a heartbeat before knocking, long enough for her nerves to whisper all their usual lies. "You don't belong here. You'll ruin this. You're not ready." But before she could listen, the door swung open. "You came," Daisy shouted, her voice ringing through the quiet morning like music. Hazel appeared behind her, grinning shyly. "We've been waiting since 7. The smell of butter, coffee, and vanilla filled the air as they pulled her inside. The house felt alive, warm, imperfect, full of love. Children's drawings covered the fridge. A half-folded pile of laundry sat on the couch. The kind of home built by hands that had learned what really mattered. And then she saw him. Matthew stood in the kitchen wearing jeans and a freshly ironed blue shirt, the same one from the night of the missed date. He looked up and smiled, and it was different this time. Not awkward or apologetic, just honest. "You made it," he said. "I did," Kayla replied, "and I brought an appetite." He laughed, that easy, unguarded sound that had stayed with her all week. "Good, because the butterflies are a disaster today." "The butterflies?" Before he could answer, Hazel pulled her to the table, where a platter of pancakes shaped like butterflies, and a few questionable blobs, sat in the center. "They're Daddy's specialty," Hazel explained solemnly. "Even the weird ones taste good." Breakfast was chaos in the best possible way. Syrup on the table, laughter in the air, Daisy correcting her father's cooking technique, Hazel giggling at every joke Kayla made. And somewhere in the middle of that ordinary mess, something extraordinary began to take root, a sense of belonging that neither Matthew nor Kayla had felt in years. After breakfast, the girls dragged Kayla to the living room to show her their art projects. Crayon butterflies, tissue paper collages, a cardboard crown labeled Mommy's Angels. Kayla smiled through the ache in her chest. "Your mom would be so proud of you," she said softly. Hazel looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "Daddy says Mommy's proud from heaven, but sometimes he gets quiet when he says that." Kayla's gaze drifted toward the kitchen. Matthew stood at the sink, his back turned, shoulders slightly hunched. Even from across the room, she could feel the weight he carried, not just grief, but guilt, the kind that lingers even after you've done everything right. When the girls ran outside to play, Kayla joined him at the sink, drying the plates he washed. "You're really good with them," she said quietly. He smiled faintly. "I try. Most days, I feel like I'm just making it up as I go." "You're doing better than you think." He paused, glancing at her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them looked away. "I wasn't sure I'd ever do this again," he admitted. "Let someone in. The girls, they're my whole world. I can't risk them getting attached to someone who might not stay." Kayla felt her throat tighten. "I get that," she said softly. "I've spent years keeping people out, telling myself it was safer that way. But safe isn't the same as happy, is it?" He shook his head slowly. "No, it's not." Outside, Daisy's laughter carried through the open window. "Daddy, Miss Kayla, come see the tree house." Matthew smiled. "You ready for the grand tour?" The backyard stretched wide under the autumn sun, scattered with fallen leaves. The treehouse stood proudly in the corner, sturdy, handmade, painted with uneven strokes of white and pale yellow. There was a small window with curtains, and a sign above the door in uneven letters, "Mommy's Angels." "You built this yourself?" Kayla asked. "Every inch," he said, looking up at it. "I didn't know what else to do after she died, so I built something that would last." They climbed the rope ladder together, the wood creaking beneath their feet. Inside, the walls were covered in the girls' drawings, butterflies, stars, a stick-figure family holding hands. In one corner, on a small shelf, sat a framed photo of a smiling woman with green eyes and curly brown hair. She was beautiful. Kayla whispered. "She was everything," Matthew said softly. "And when she was gone, I didn't know how to be anything else but broken." Kayla looked at him, at the man who had rebuilt his life from splinters, and felt her heart swell with something she didn't dare name yet. "You're not broken," she said quietly. "You're still building." He turned to her then, the sunlight filtering through the small window, catching in his eyes. "And what about you?" he asked. "What are you building?" She smiled faintly, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe a reason to believe again. For a moment time slowed. The sounds of the world faded until there was only the two of them. The smell of pine wood, the whisper of wind, and the weight of something tender between them. Then Daisy's voice rang from below. "Daddy, Miss Kayla, we found a butterfly." Matthew chuckled, breaking the spell. "Looks like we're needed." He reached out his hand to help her down the ladder. She took it, her fingers lingering a little longer than necessary. Back on the ground, the girls were crouched near the flower bed, watching a small yellow butterfly flutter between the petals. "Mommy says butterflies mean love," Hazel said. Kayla smiled. "Then I think she's trying to tell you something." Evening, after the girls were asleep, Kayla lingered by the door, coat in hand. "Thank you for today," she said. "Don't thank me," Matthew replied. "You made it what it was." "I haven't done anything." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You showed up. That's more than most people do." For a heartbeat, the world went still. Their eyes held, full of the kind of honesty that doesn't need words. Kayla wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was a whisper. "I'll see you soon." He nodded. "Saturday. Every Saturday." She smiled, and as she stepped out into the cool night air, the stars above seemed a little brighter than they had before. But as the door closed behind her, Matthew lingered by the window, watching her walk down the driveway. He didn't know where this would go, if it would last, if he was ready. But for the first time in years, he felt something that wasn't grief, hope, and that terrified him more than anything. Autumn had settled fully into the little town of Maple Ridge. The air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Days grew shorter, nights a little colder, and in between them, something gentle began to take shape. Matthew and Kayla had fallen into a rhythm neither of them planned, yet neither wanted to break. That IT started with small moments. Morning texts that turned into evening calls. Lunch breaks that somehow ended at the same diner. Weekends spent in the backyard while Daisy and Hazel showed Kayla how to make perfect mud pies. It wasn't dramatic or grand. It was quiet, honest, real. Every Saturday, Kayla showed up for pancakes. And every Saturday, Matthew wore that same blue shirt, the one that had become their private joke. The girls insisted it was the lucky one. Matthew pretended to groan, but he wore it anyway. One morning, as the four of them sat at the table, Hazel asked with innocent curiosity, "Miss Kayla, do you have kids?" The question hit harder than it should have. Kayla hesitated, setting down her fork. "No, sweetheart, I don't." "Why not?" Daisy pressed, chin in her hands. Kayla smiled softly. "I guess I was waiting for the right reason." Matthew's eyes lifted to hers, and in that quiet, something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of understanding that went deeper than either expected. Later that day, they took the girls to the park. The sky was clear, the trees dressed in gold and amber, and the laughter of children echoed through the open air. Kayla sat on a bench beside Matthew, watching the twins race each other across the grass. "They adore you," he said quietly. "They make it easy," she replied, her voice full of warmth. "They're incredible, Matthew. They're strong, kind, brave. That doesn't happen by accident." He smiled faintly, eyes fixed on his daughters. "I wish I could take credit. Most days I just try not to mess them up." She turned to look at him. "You're doing more than you know." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "I used to think love was simple. You find the right person, you build a life, and that's it. But when you lose someone, it changes everything. Love becomes this thing you're scared to touch. Too fragile. Too dangerous." Kayla's gaze softened. "Maybe love doesn't get smaller when we lose it. Maybe it just changes shape." He looked at her, and for a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. There it was, that invisible thread pulling them closer. The one that had been quietly weaving itself between them since the night two little girls walked into a coffee shop. When Daisy and Hazel ran back, cheeks flushed and laughter spilling over, the moment broke. But something stayed, the unspoken truth hanging in the space between their smiles. The days that followed moved like slow music, easy, beautiful, fragile. Matthew began stopping by Kayla's clinic with coffee, sometimes under the excuse of checking on her rescued tabby, Milo, though she knew better. She'd catch him leaning against the counter, watching her work with that quiet, steady admiration she was still learning to accept. One evening, He helped her fix a broken door hinge at the clinic after hours. The light was dim, the smell of disinfectant and coffee in the air. When he finished tightening the last screw, she handed him a paper cup. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I wanted to," he replied, smiling as he wiped grease from his hands. There was a moment of silence, comfortable but charged, the kind of silence that says everything words can't. "I forgot what this feels like," Kayla said finally. What feels like?" "Letting someone help me." She laughed softly. "I'm usually the one fixing things." Matthew's smile faded into something gentler. "You don't always have to be the one holding everything together, Kayla." Her throat tightened at the way he said her name. Slow, careful, like he wanted to remember it. "And what about you?" she asked. "Who fixes you?" He looked away, his expression turning inward. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe that's what I've been doing wrong." Kayla didn't reply. Instead, she reached out and touched his hand. It was a small gesture, tentative, fleeting, but it was enough. A few weeks later, it snowed for the first time that season. Not a heavy snow, just a quiet dusting that softened everything it touched. Kayla stopped by the Caldwell home unannounced that Saturday, holding a box of cookies she'd baked that morning. The girls squealed when they saw her. "Miss Kayla, you came early." "Couldn't stay away," she teased. They spent the morning decorating the Christmas tree, a tradition Matthew had struggled to continue since his wife passed. But this year was different. The girls hummed along to holiday songs, giggling as they tangled themselves in string lights. Kayla stood on a chair to hang an ornament shaped like a butterfly, while Matthew steadied her waist from below. For a second, she wobbled, laughing. His hands tightened around her, instinctively protective. When she looked down, their eyes met, and suddenly, the laughter faded into something softer. Closer, Dottie stepped back quickly, clearing his throat. "You're going to fall," he said, half smiling. "Not with you standing there," she replied quietly. That night, after the tree was lit and the girls were asleep, they sat on the couch together, a soft blanket draped across their laps. The only light came from the glow of the Christmas tree and the fire crackling in the hearth. Matthew turned toward her. "I haven't done this in a long time," he said. "What? Sit still," she teased. He smiled faintly. "No, feel like this, scared and calm at the same time." Kayla's voice softened. "That's how you know it's real." Silence settled between them again, that tender, suspended kind that feels like the edge off something sacred. Matthew looked at her, really looked, and something in him broke open. "I didn't think I could love again," he whispered. "I thought that part of me was gone." Kayla's breath caught, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say." "I do," he interrupted gently, "because it's true." His hand found hers, warm and certain. "Kayla, I don't know where this is going, but when you're here, everything feels right again." Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. "You make it sound simple." He smiled. "Maybe it's supposed to be." The fire popped softly, filling the silence with warmth. She leaned her head against a shoulder, and for the first time in years, Matthew didn't feel haunted by what he'd lost. He felt grateful for what he'd found, but love, even the gentle kind, always carries its shadows. A week later, a phone call shattered their fragile calm. The library project had hit another emergency. Something about unstable ground beneath the main structure. It meant long hours, late nights, and stress that threatened to undo all the light they'd built together. Matthew started coming home later and later. Kayla tried to understand, but doubt crept in like winter wind through cracked glass. Every unread message, every delayed reply, felt like history repeating itself. One Friday night, she found herself sitting alone in her clinic again. The same cold tea, the same silence, wondering if maybe this was where her story always led. To almost, to nearly, to almost enough. And then, just as she began to gather her things, headlights flashed through the window. The door opened, and there he was, exhausted, covered in dust, but smiling. "You're still here," he said softly. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But then I realized something. Every time I fix a crack in that building, I'm just trying to do what you already did for me." She frowned. What's that? He stepped closer, his voice low. Make me feel whole again. Kayla's eyes filled, her voice trembling. You're not the only one learning how. He reached for her hand. Then maybe we can learn together. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow, quiet, endless. And inside that small clinic, surrounded by the hum of life and the smell of cedar and winter air, something finally shifted, not a beginning, not an ending, just two broken hearts finally beating in rhythm. The following weeks unfolded like slow winter light, pale, gentle, and uncertain. The library project consumed Matthew's days and nights. Every beam, every column, every calculation carried the weight of his perfectionism. He told himself it was just work, but deep down it was fear. Fear of failing again. Fear of losing something else that mattered. Kayla tried to be patient. She understood responsibility, understood what it meant to carry other people's safety on your shoulders. But what she didn't understand was silence, the kind that crept in after days of no calls, no texts, no word at all. The more she missed him, the more the old doubts came whispering back. You always end up alone. You always care more. Those voices had kept her safe for years, but now they felt like poison. Because this time, she wanted to believe by mid-December, the snow had grown heavy, coating the streets in white silence. The town's Christmas lights flickered in the distance, but for Kayla, the warmth of the season felt far away. That night, she sat in her clinic office, scrolling absently through her phone, staring at old photos of the twins painting ornaments, of Matthew holding Daisy on his shoulders while Hazel laughed beside them. The memory hurt in the best and worst ways. Then her phone buzzed. Matthew Caldwell. Can I see you tonight? Just 6 words. But her heart answered before her mind could. Kayla, always. He arrived an hour later, snow dusting his shoulders, exhaustion carved into the lines of his face. But behind it, there was something else, a fragile urgency. A man who'd been fighting battles no one saw. Kayla opened the door before he could knock. The moment their eyes met, the air shifted, charged, quiet, heavy with all the things left unsaid. You look tired, she whispered. He stepped inside, brushing the cold from his jacket. The smell of winter, metal and pine, followed him in. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the soft hum of the clinic lights and the rhythm of their breathing. I'm sorry, he said finally, for disappearing. Kayla crossed her arms, more to hold herself together than out of anger. You didn't disappear, Matthew. You just stopped letting me in. He flinched at the truth in her words. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From me, he said quietly. The words hit like a confession and a plea all at once. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing. Every time I get close to someone, I start thinking about what happens if it all falls apart again. I can't do that to my girls. I can't let them lose another piece of their world. Kayla's voice softened. You're not the only one scared of that. He looked up then, his eyes full of something raw and real. You, she nodded. I told myself I didn't need anyone for 2 years. I buried myself in work because it was easier than admitting I was lonely. And then you, and those girls, walked into my life, and suddenly I remembered what warmth feels like. And now, the thought of losing it terrifies me. He took a slow step forward. So what do we do with that? She met his gaze. We stop running from it. Matthew's hand reached out, almost hesitant, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. I don't know if I'm ready for this, he whispered, but I know I don't want to lose it. Kayla's voice broke as she said, Then don't. He closed the distance between them, and suddenly, they were inches apart. The air felt alive, electric, fragile, sacred. He looked at her as if memorizing her face, her breath, her presence. Then slowly, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a perfect kiss. It was full of tremor and truth, the kind that carries both promise and pain. But when it deepened, when her hand rose to his cheek and his fingers slid to the back of her neck, the world outside vanished. When they finally pulled apart, Kayla's forehead rested against his chest. I don't know what happens next, she whispered. Neither do I, he said. But I think that's okay. They spent the rest of the evening talking, really talking, about his wife, about the night she died, about the ache that never left but had started to fade into memory instead of a wound, about Kayla's childhood, her absent father, her belief that love was something you had to earn. Each story peeled away a layer until there was nothing left between them but truth. At one point, he told her about the night his wife had collapsed, how he'd been at work, how guilt still whispered that maybe, if he'd been home, things would have been different. Kayla listened without judgment, her hand finding his, squeezing gently. "Matthew," she said softly, "you can't keep punishing yourself for surviving." He looked at her like he wanted to believe it, but didn't know how. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," she said, "but it's possible." He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally loosening. "You make me want to try." Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the world in quiet. Hours passed unnoticed as they sat close on the couch, wrapped in conversation and the kind of peace that comes when two souls recognize each other's scars. Around midnight, he stood to leave, but paused at the door. "You know," he said softly, "when the girls met you that night, Daisy told me something." Kayla smiled faintly. "Should I be worried?" she said. "Daddy." Miss Kayla laughs like sunshine. Kayla felt her throat tighten, tears threatening to spill. "She's something else." "She's right," he said. "You light up places I didn't know were dark." Her tears finally fell, quiet and clean. "You should go before you make me cry harder." He smiled, that gentle half-smile that reached his eyes. "Then I'd never leave." When the door closed behind him, Kayla sank into the silence he left behind. Not an empty silence, but a full one, the kind that hums with everything unspoken. For the first time in years, she felt peace, fragile, imperfect, but real. The next morning, she woke to a text from him. "Matthew, the girls are begging to see you. Dinner tonight." She smiled through tears. She hadn't realized she'd been holding back. Kayla wouldn't miss it. That night, they cooked together in his kitchen while Daisy and Hazel built snow kingdoms in the backyard. The house smelled like rosemary and warmth. The girls' laughter filtered through the window. And for a moment, life felt complete. Kayla looked at Matthew across the kitchen counter. "You know," she said softly, "for someone who doesn't believe in fate, you're doing a good job convincing me otherwise." He smiled. "Maybe fate's just the name we give to second chances." They ate by candlelight, simple and perfect. Hazel climbed onto Kayla's lap halfway through dinner, declaring, "You belong here now." Matthew froze, startled, but Kayla just smiled and kissed the top of the little girl's head. "I think I do." The twins exchanged proud glances, like their mission had finally been completed. Later, after the girls were asleep, Matthew walked Kayla to her car. The night was cold, but their breath came out in soft laughter. He brushed a flake of snow from her hair, his hand lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For giving me back my voice," he said. "For giving them laughter again." She smiled, heart aching in the best way. "And what about you?" He hesitated, eyes glistening. "You gave me the one thing I thought I'd never find again." "What's that?" "Peace." And there, under a quiet blanket of falling snow, he kissed her again, slower this time, with no hesitation, no fear, not a beginning, not an ending, just the truth. The new year arrived wrapped in quiet snowfall and promises that felt too fragile to speak out loud. For the first time in years, Matthew felt whole. The girls were thriving. Kayla had become part of their daily rhythm. Pancake mornings, bedtime stories, laughter echoing through the hallways that once held only silence. But life, as always, had its own timing. The library project was weeks from completion, and the city council had scheduled an early inspection, one that could make or break his company's reputation. If something went wrong, it wouldn't just cost him a contract. It would cost him everything he'd built to keep his family safe. The night before the inspection, a storm rolled in, fierce and unrelenting. Wind howled through the eaves as Matthew sat at his desk. Blueprints spread out before him, lines blurring through exhaustion. His phone buzzed. "Kayla. Kayla, long night." "Matthew." Too long. I'll make it up to you. Kayla, you don't have to make it up. Just don't shut me out. He stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. Her words hit too close. Don't shut me out. It was what his late wife had once said, the last fight they ever had. And suddenly, all the fear came flooding back. What if he hurt Kayla the same way? What if history repeated itself? He set the phone down and buried his head in his hands. Kayla sat in her car outside his house the next morning, engine idling, watching the storm clouds drift apart. She hadn't slept much either. Something in her chest felt heavy. That kind of ache that doesn't come from anger, but from missing someone you haven't even lost yet. The twins were inside with their babysitter, but Matthew wasn't answering his phone. She told herself not to worry, but worry had already moved in. She turned off the car, stepped out into the cold, and headed for the library site. When she arrived, the place was chaos. Trucks lined the lot. Men shouted over the sound of generators. And the building, that proud, half-finished monument to second chances, stood against the gray sky like a question waiting for its answer. She spotted him immediately. Hard hat, clipboard, the same blue shirt rolled up at the sleeves. He looked every bit the man she'd come to know. Strong, steady, but somewhere beneath it all, fraying at the edges. "Matthew," she called out, her voice barely cutting through the noise. He turned, surprised. "Kayla, what are you?" "I needed to see you," she said, stepping closer. "You've been gone for 3 days. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's just work. Big day. I didn't want to drag you into the stress." She folded her arms. "You're not dragging me into anything. I'm here because I want to be." He hesitated, eyes darting between her and the sight. "Kayla, I can't afford distractions right now." The words landed like stones. She blinked, stunned. "Distractions? That's not what I meant," he said quickly. No, I heard you." Her voice wavered, a mix of hurt and disbelief. "I'm not asking you to stop being who you are, Matthew. I'm just asking you to let me stand beside you." He exhaled sharply, torn between duty and emotion. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under." "Then help me understand," she pleaded. "Because right now, it feels like every time we get close, you find a reason to pull away." The sight noise faded around them, swallowed by the storm's after echo. He looked at her, jaw tight, eyes full of guilt. "You think this is easy for me? You think I don't want to run straight to you every second of the day? But I can't. Not when I have 2 girls counting on me to hold everything together." Kayla's voice broke. "You're not the only one holding something together, Matthew. You're just the only one who thinks you have to do it alone." For a long time, neither spoke. The wind whipped through the site, lifting loose papers into the air. Somewhere, a piece of scaffolding groaned in the gust. Kayla took a step closer. "I'm not asking to replace what you lost. I never was. But if you keep living in fear of breaking again, you'll never let yourself heal." He turned away, running a trembling hand through his hair. "You don't get it." "Then make me get it," she said softly. He spun around, his eyes wet now. "Because I couldn't save her, Kayla. I couldn't save the woman I loved. I was supposed to be there, to protect her, and I wasn't. And now every time I care about someone new, all I can think about is what happens when I fail again." Silence fell like snow. Kayla's eyes glistened. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached up to touch his face. "You didn't fail her, Matthew. You loved her. You built a life with her. You raised her daughters. That's not failure. That's survival." He closed his eyes, her hand still on his cheek. For the first time, he let himself cry, not the silent, restrained tears of a man who hides his pain, but the deep, unguarded kind that come when years of grief finally give way to grace. Kayla wrapped her arms around him. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered. "You just have to be here." And for once, he didn't resist. He let himself fall into the moment, into her warmth, into the truth that love wasn't about control or protection. It was about surrender. Hours later, the inspection went smoothly. The library passed with near-perfect marks. But that wasn't the victory Matthew remembered. It was the moment afterward, when he found Kayla waiting by the trailer with 2 paper cups of coffee, snowflakes catching in her hair. He smiled as he took one from her. "You didn't have to wait. I wanted to," she said simply. He exhaled, the tension finally leaving his body. "You were right. About everything." She tilted her head. "Which part?" He smiled faintly. "The part about not doing this alone." They stood there, coffee warming their hands as the snow fell quietly around them. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a man divided between past and present. He just felt whole. That evening, the four of them sat together by the fireplace: Daisy, Hazel, Kayla, and Matthew. The twins were busy making paper snowflakes, while the adults exchanged soft smiles over steaming mugs of cocoa. Hazel held up her crooked snowflake. "Look, Daddy, it's perfect." He laughed softly. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." The woman who had walked into his life by accident and somehow taught him to see beauty in imperfection. Daisy climbed into his lap, curling against his chest. "Daddy," she said sleepily, "are you happy now?" He froze for a second, his throat tightening. Then he looked at Kayla, who was smiling through tears. "Yeah," he said softly. "Yeah, I think I am." The girls drifted off one by one, their tiny breaths steady and safe. Matthew and Kayla sat together in the quiet, the fire painting gold across their faces. "I used to think healing meant forgetting," he said, "but I think it's remembering without hurting." Kayla nodded. "That's what love does. It doesn't erase the scars. It makes them part of the story." He reached for her hand, fingers intertwining. "Thank you for not walking away." She smiled faintly. "I tried," she admitted, "but two little girls wouldn't let me." They both laughed softly, their shoulders touching, the warmth of the fire wrapping around them like a promise. Outside, the storm had passed. The world was quiet again, blanketed in peace. And for the first time since the night his wife died, Matthew Caldwell wasn't afraid of tomorrow. Spring returned quietly that year, the kind that slips in on soft breezes and morning sunlight through half-open windows. Life had fallen into an easy rhythm for the Caldwell house. Laughter in the kitchen, pancakes on Saturdays, storybooks before bed. And through it all, Kayla had become something constant. Not a guest anymore, not just a visitor, but family. The girls called her Miss Kayla less and less. Sometimes it was Kay. Sometimes just Mom by accident, the kind of accident that made Matthew's chest ache and heal at the same time. He'd catch her eyes when it happened, both of them smiling through quiet tears. 6 months had passed since that night in the snow, the night he finally let himself cry, the night she stayed. The new library had opened to the public 3 weeks ago. Matthew had stood with his daughters and Kayla as the mayor cut the ribbon. Cameras flashed, hands clapped, but all he could see was them, Daisy's grin missing a front tooth, Hazel clutching Kayla's hand, and Kayla looking back at him like the world had finally stopped spinning long enough to let them rest. That evening, after the celebration, they went for a walk through town. The same streets where they'd once been strangers now felt like chapters of their story. The coffee shop where it began, the park where laughter replaced grief, the quiet corner where Kayla first told him she wasn't afraid anymore. As they passed the Maple Avenue coffee shop, Matthew slowed. The bell above the door jingled as he pushed it open, and a wave of nostalgia hit them both. The tables, the lights, even the faint smell of cinnamon, it was all the same. Déjà vu. Kayla said softly. He smiled, more like a full circle. They sat at the same corner table, the one where she'd once waited, believing she'd been stood up, the one where 2 little girls had marched in and rewritten fate. Kayla reached out, tracing her finger along the wood grain. "Feels like a lifetime ago," she murmured. "Maybe it was," he said, "or maybe it was just the beginning." She smiled, unaware of the small velvet box in his pocket. The next few days passed in a blur of small, perfect moments. Kayla helped Hazel rehearse for her school play. Daisy convinced Matthew to build a lemonade stand that somehow turned into a full backyard festival. They were busy, messy, alive. And for the first time in years, the house was full of sound. But beneath all of it, Matthew carried a quiet secret. He had been planning something that terrified him and thrilled him in equal measure. It happened one Saturday afternoon, exactly 1 year after the day they met. The girls had gone to spend the night with Mrs. Ferguson, their beloved babysitter, who pretended not to know why Matthew had asked. The house was calm, candles flickering, soft music playing in the background. The smell of vanilla and spring air drifting through open windows. Kayla walked in wearing a simple blue dress, her hair loosely tied back. "You look nervous," she teased. He smiled, hands in his pockets. "Maybe I am." She laughed, walking closer. "Matthew Caldwell nervous? That's new." He took a deep breath. "You remember what you said that night at the coffee shop? That you didn't believe in second chances?" Kayla nodded slowly, curiosity blooming in her eyes. "I remember." He stepped closer, his voice low, sincere. "I didn't either. Not until two little girls walked through a door and said, 'Our daddy's sorry he's late.'" Her lips parted, a small tremor in her breath. "I thought I was showing up for a date," he continued. "But really, I was being rescued. By them. By you." He reached into his pocket, pulling out the velvet box. Her hand flew to her mouth as he knelt down on one knee, his voice breaking halfway through the first sentence. "Kayla Emerson," he said, his eyes glistening. "You walked into our lives when we needed light the most. You taught me that healing isn't forgetting, it's loving again. You gave my daughter's laughter, my house warmth, and my heart a reason to hope. You are my second chance, my home, my peace. Will you marry me?" For a moment, the world went silent. No music, no breath, just the sound of a heart breaking open in the best possible way. Kayla's tears fell before her words did. She nodded, laughing through the sob that escaped her. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, stronger. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands shaking. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. He rose to his feet, pulling her into his arms. Their laughter and tears blended together in a sound that felt like home. Later that night, the front door burst open, and Daisy and Hazel came running in, cheeks flushed, eyes wide. "We knew it." Daisy squealed. "You did it, didn't you?" Kayla laughed, showing them the ring. "You two really don't miss anything, do you?" Hazel beamed, jumping up and down. "We picked it. We picked it." Matthew crouched to their level, tears in his eyes. "You two are the best matchmakers a dad could ever ask for." "No," Daisy said with the wisdom of someone far older than 6. "We're just the messengers. Mommy helped too." The room went still, not in sadness, but in awe. Kayla knelt down and hugged them both tightly. "I think you're right," she whispered. "I think she did." The girl squeezed her back, arms wrapped tight around her neck. "We love you, Miss Kayla," Hazel murmured. Kayla smiled through tears. "You can drop the miss now." The wedding was small, simple, and perfect. A spring afternoon in the Caldwell backyard, sunlight catching in the branches of the old oak tree where the girls' treehouse stood. Daisy and Hazel walked down the aisle first, wearing butterfly dresses that shimmered like tiny wings. Each carried a single white rose, one for their mother, whose love still lived in every corner of their home. When Kayla walked out, Matthew forgot to breathe. There was no orchestra, no grand ceremony, just the sound of wind in the trees and the quiet gasp of two little girls who whispered, "She looks like Mommy's songs." They stood beneath the treehouse, the same one built from grief, and turned it into a place of new beginnings. Matthew's vows were simple. "You gave me permission to love again," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You showed me that honoring the past doesn't mean being trapped in it. I love you, Kayla, for the life we lost, for the one we found, and for every tomorrow after." Kayla's vows came through tears and laughter. "I came to a coffee shop looking for a date," she said, smiling at Daisy and Hazel. "I found two little angels instead. You rescued me as much as I ever rescued you. You taught me that love doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it's 17 minutes late, carried in by two brave girls who refused to let it slip away." When they kissed, Daisy and Hazel cheered louder than anyone. The guests laughed. The wind danced through the trees, and somewhere, in the space between loss and joy, peace finally found its home. As the sun dipped low, Kayla stood alone for a moment by the treehouse. The air smelled of lilac and promise. She looked up at the tiny window and whispered softly, Thank you for raising them, for loving them so well that they knew how to love me too. Matthew's arm slipped around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. She would have loved you, he murmured. Kayla smiled faintly, leaning into him. I think she already does. They stood there, watching the girls chase butterflies across the lawn, laughter echoing through the golden air. Sometimes, love doesn't arrive when you expect it. Sometimes it's 17 minutes late, carried in by two little girls who refuse to let their daddy's heart stay broken. And sometimes, when you're brave enough to wait, to open the door, to believe again, that's when the real story begins.